Hello. Welcome to Civilization Jihad Awareness, the show where truth wins every time. And let's talk about where that term civilization jihad comes from. It's not a term I created. It's a term the Muslim Brotherhood created to define their war on North America. This comes from the explanatory memorandum, which was discovered thanks to one police officer, a Maryland transit officer, doing his job. He just caught somebody doing something suspicious, taking pictures of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge support structure, and pulled the guy over. And as a result, they searched his house. They found 93 banker boxes of documents in a dugout, hidden sub-basement. Underneath the basement, that was there. In this one document, like the explanatory memorandum, there's one paragraph I'm just going to read that tells you where that term, civilization jihad, comes from. It says this, number 4, understanding the role of the Muslim Brotherhood in North America. The process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process, with all the word means. The Ikhwan must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers, so that, so that it is eliminated and God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. Without this level of understanding, we're not up to this challenge, prepared ourselves for jihad yet. It is a Muslim's destiny to perform jihad and work wherever he is and wherever he lands until the final hour comes. And there's no escape from that destiny except for those who choose to slack. But would the slackers and the mujahideen be equal? Now, as I talk about this topic, civilization jihad, I'm talking about a secretive jihad, one that's done behind the scenes, one that's done in such a way as you're not supposed to notice it. And that brings us to talking about who our guest is today, because Patrick Dunleavy is one of the men who has probably done more for this country in his short term. He served for 26 years, people, in working in the criminal justice system. In 26 years, I'll call it a short term because I can just imagine his impact, how it is now after he's served. Because his book, The Fertile Soil of Jihad, is a must read if you have any desire to learn about civilization jihad, you have any desire to learn about terrorism. His book is an absolute must-read. I put it on the same level as reading Stephen Coughlin's Catastrophic Failure, because this addresses the problems in prisons. During his career, Patrick Dunleavy worked undercover, infiltrating criminal enterprises, contract murder conspiracies, etc. But after 2001, Patrick Dunleavy was appointed the Deputy Inspector General of the Criminal Intelligence Unit. Now, this is in New York State. In some ways, that makes me identify with him better. At the request of various agencies, Mr. Dunleavy has been a speaker on the topic of terrorism. He's given speeches to groups like the FBI, CIA, Scotland Yard, Canadian Intelligence Services, CIS. In June of 2011, Patrick testified before the House Committee on Homeland Security regarding the threat of radicalization in the Muslim community. He is a key figure in Operation Hades, an investigation in that probed the radical Islamic recruitment movement from jihad from both inside and outside prison walls. And as I say that, I want to welcome in as I stumble into the studio and open his mic. Thank you, Patrick, for joining us.
Oh,
Hello?
my pleasure, Paul. I appreciate you having me. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Paul?
Thank you. Thank you. I can hear you. I'm so glad to have you back, and I keep wondering if you're going to come back to New York someday, but I hope you're enjoying the West Coast area. I always marvel with your book, too.
I appreciate that. Thanks a lot. I always have to travel back to New York just if I'm going to get a decent bagel or a slice of pizza. But
I've heard stories about the pizza being different or the water being different. And affecting stuff. So I don't know how true that is, but I've heard stories. I have friends out in Vegas who say you can't. It's not the same. So,
it's not. It doesn't matter where you go, and you'll see a sign that says, New York style pizza, but it's not the same. So.
Well, thank you. So I want to start up. I asked Patrick Dunleavy to join us to speak about the article he wrote for Investigative Project on Terrorism, which I put the link in above the chat room. And I just want to start out. I've got a series of questions for Mr. Dunleavy, and this article to me was really, really powerful. I got to say that the article talks about CAIR, and CAIR, it's labeled CAIR Continues Building Its Wall of Resistance Against Law Enforcement. And for those of you unfamiliar with this topic, CAIR actually put out a flyer at one time using some of these words. But let's get started. Your article states, with a bang, for those unfamiliar with the dangerous nature of the Council on American Islamic Relations, aka CAIR, or Hamas in America, as I like to call them, when you state several years ago, the Investigative Project on Terrorism exposed CAIR's deep-seated hostility towards law enforcement agencies. Could you tell us, the listeners, a little bit more about what IPT discovered?
Sure. Well, it goes back probably about 7.5 years ago, when the FBI was doing a series of investigations into radicalization in the Midwest, and CAIR came out with a poster. It's kind of an ominous-looking poster. It's a headline, says, "Build a Wall of Resistance." It's got a series of houses where the front doors are being slammed shut. And then there's this ominous figure. It almost looks like the old Mad Magazine Spy versus Spy, black trench coat, black hat, shadowy figure with FBI on it. And the underscore of it is, "Don't talk to the FBI." And what CAIR was doing right then and there was telling its constituents to not cooperate with law enforcement in any investigations. They believed that law enforcement was evil, that they were only singling out Muslims. We found that when we looked at what motivated them to do this, we went all the way back to a trial in 2007 that actually went for 2 years to 2009 on the Holy Land Foundation, which found that officials from CAIR were involved in funneling charitable donations to Hamas. Now, Hamas is a terrorist organization so designated by our State Department since 1997. Because of that, the FBI in 2009 actually sent a letter to Senator Kyle, I believe it is, in Arizona, stating that in light of the evidence connecting Hamas and CAIR, that the FBI suspended all formal contacts between CAIR. And one of those things that CAIR was so upset about was the fact that it could not be that main spokesperson or ecclesiastical organization representing Muslims in official capacities. For instance, if a chaplain needed to be certified in the military or in prison or any other type of government agency, CAIR wanted to be the organization to step forward and say, yes, we endorse this person. The FBI wanted nothing to do with that because of CAIR's connections to a terrorist organization. And quite frankly, it was that, I believe, that precipitated CAIR's resistance toward law enforcement in general, not just the FBI, but in law enforcement in general. They've done the same thing in New York with the NYPD, when the NYPD was trying to build a bridge with the Muslim community. So that's where it all goes back to.
Thank you. You state outwardly CAIR claims to want to work with law enforcement agencies to protect our nation, but the truth is really different, isn't it? What do you think about this?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like the old saying, it's talking out of both sides of your mouth. On one time, you say that you want to work with law enforcement and you want to cooperate with law enforcement, but then on the other side of their mouth, they're making comments like this: build a wall of resistance, don't talk to law enforcement, making statements saying that the only thing law enforcement wants to do is spy on the Muslim community. First of all, the Muslim community is not really a community as we would see it with ethnic groups. If you talk about the Asian American community or the Hispanic American community or the Italian American communities, those are communities based on ethnicity, and that's where most people generally live in neighborhoods that have a certain ethnic mix. Muslims are a religious group. They're not one race. So when you say you're spying on the Muslims and you put that into an individual's mind, they're not going to want to talk to police, even on a regular investigation, where community policing is always going to need the cooperation of the community leaders. So if you're saying don't talk to them, they're evil, they only want to spy on you, it's Islamophobic, that's a different statement than what the original statement was, that we want to cooperate with law enforcement. They want to cooperate on their terms.
And it's purposeful. I mean, it's like they're holding they'll grab, like they did with the. I was just reading this again. The California, where they held that. All of a sudden, they're holding a press conference at a place that tells the FBI, don't cooperate with the FBI. They're holding a press conference for the what's the name of the place? California, where they shot the place up. It's been a while. I don't recall the one you're talking about. I do
know
about
the individual.
2-3 years back. Yeah, it was a Christmas
I'm not
shooting.
familiar.
The
San Bernardino you're talking about.
San Bernardino, that's
San Bernardino. Yeah, sure. A Christmas party by office workers, and individual comes in who's an employee, comes in with his wife, armed to the teeth, for no other purpose other than to kill. And again, this was a planned attack and stuff like that. But the San Francisco chapter of CAIR has made statements regarding particularly what I was talking about is the Department of Homeland Security has a program countering violent extremists. It was a program set up back in the Obama administration when Eric Holder was the Attorney General. And now it's progressed, obviously, as years have gone by, and it's where local law enforcement agencies can receive financial help to either help with investigations or help with dealing with social or criminal problems, for instance, radicalization. We all know that radicalization is a problem, so wouldn't you want to deal with that? Well, CAIR in San Francisco comes out and says this is tainted money. It's tainted because it's coming from a different administration, and it's only looking to spy on our community. And it targeted the Alameda County Sheriff's Office because it was awarded a grant. It also targeted the city of Los Angeles, which was also given a grant for almost $500,000 to combat radicalization in the community. Both those groups, the Los Angeles city of Los Angeles, actually refunded the grant back to the Department of Homeland Security after CAIR filed a lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles. So this type of obstructionism, where you don't really want local law enforcement agencies, and the one in Alameda County Sheriff's, by the way, was dealing with two very critical issues that we have in society. One is radicalization, the other is recidivism. Recidivism being the means by which individuals who get arrested, go into jail, only come out to go back again. It's like a vicious circle. So this program that the Sheriff's Department had would have dealt with the most vulnerable, those that are in jail, that are susceptible to radicalization influences, as well as helping with a program to help the individuals once they get out of jail not come back. It was a good program. It is a good program. Why CAIR would find some sort of problem with helping individuals who definitely, as again, we found over the years that people that are in prison, people that are in jail, tend to be more susceptible to radicalizing influences, whether it's radical ideologies such as radical Islamic teachings, writings, video postings. And so I would say, gee, CAIR, why don't you want to do something about this? But they didn't. It was almost like they did not want to see individuals successful just because they
I think
thought
this
it was
is somewhat humorous because we're talking about CEV funding. And CAIR, under the Obama administration, was constantly seeking that. In fact, they were getting money for various chapters. Some chapters in Florida got CEV money. So it's almost like they're jealous they're not getting money for their own organization. Now it's going to people who actually need it.
Right.
I kind of sit there and laugh.
The goals are admirable. I mean, the goals are admirable. But, I mean, to get back to this CAIR San Francisco office and its resistance against authority, it doesn't just go to law enforcement, because the same individual who spoke out against the Department of Homeland Security grants because she thought that they were spying on Muslims just recently came out with a statement. There was an individual, Staff Sergeant Abdul Rahman Gaitan, who was in the Air Force. He applied for a waiver to be able to grow a beard because of his religion. Now, whether we agree with that or not, the military, the Air Force, actually formally granted the sergeant a waiver based on his religious beliefs. Now, instead of CAIR complimenting the U.S. military for the decision they made, this is what the director of CAIR in San Francisco said. Great news. You can now rock your Sunnah beard while bombing your Muslim brothers and sisters. She was basically accusing the U.S. military of being at war with Muslims and killing innocent Muslims, which is a narrative that simply is not true. So you have an individual, Zara Billow, from San Francisco CAIR office, who speaks out against law enforcement, speaks out against the U.S. military, actually accusing them of killing Muslims. And, you know, that type of vitriol, that type of I don't know, hate speech, I would call it. It just exposes who CAIR is. They try to tout themselves as a civil rights organization, but in fact they're not. They're a religious organization that speaks to a religious group and quite often makes comments against the military, against law enforcement, against Israel. They've recently called out one of the CAIR officials, I believe he was from Los Angeles, Hassan Alouche, called on the destruction of Israel. Now,
yeah, that's another article that's up for Investigative Project on Terrorism.
Right.
I think it's right off his Twitter site. It says Iran's regime calling Israel a cancerous tumor is like the pot calling the kettle black. All the people of that region will be better off once both murderous regimes are terminated.
And so when you have statements like that coming from an organization that, by its very title, the Council on American Islamic Relations, I mean, how is that building relations? It's really not. It's tearing down relations. Jewish Americans, you know, would see that as a threat. They remember back to the Holocaust, and so when they hear for someone calling for Israel termination, they're thinking, well, who's next? Every Jew we're going to round up. And then CAIR speaks out against the military, saying we're bombing Muslims. Think how that reacts in the Arab community, not only in the United States but overseas. And then when they go against law enforcement, which is the first line of defense for all communities. Everybody wants to live peaceful. They want to go to work, come home, do whatever you do in your family. If you have a lawn to mow, you mow that. If you don't, you sit on your stoop like you did when I grew up in New York City. And that's what you want. And the police provide that bridge between the community and the individual and law enforcement. And this isn't the first time they've done that. Back in New York City, they actually, after the first World Trade Center bombing, it was found that most of those conspirators, El Sayed Nasser, the Blind Sheikh, and everybody, had been going between mosques in the Muslim community in the greater New York City, New Jersey area. So what happened when, after 9/11, NYPD and the NYPD Intelligence Division and Counterterrorism were looking at the same type of links? Again, it's basic police practice. If we were investigating the mafia, we generally went to an Italian neighborhood. If we were looking at Colombian drug dealers, we pretty much went to Hispanic neighborhoods. But if you're looking at a radical Islamic terror threat, where are you going to go? You're going to go to the Muslim neighborhood. Well, they filed a lawsuit and stating that the NYPD's practice was harming them. Federal Judge Martini actually found that was not true, that they were not being harmed. And so CAIR and the other ACLU and a couple of other Muslim activist groups filed an appeal. And there was no doubt that the appeal would have been won by NYPD. In came Mayor de Blasio, and he basically threw up a white flag and surrendered, told the New York City Law Department not to continue with the appeal, had the New York City Police Department remove from its website a report on radicalization in the West, which looked at how radicalization takes place, what are some of the catalysts there, what are some of the indicators. So that was another way that CAIR was able to put pressure on either political officials or to just resist whatever law enforcement was trying to do.
I'm always amazed when I look at some of this stuff, especially because a lot of it we're talking about with New York City, but I'm stuff and I'm like, wow. I mean, recidivism, and we're talking about going into the Islamic communities. Where else? You're saying it. You couldn't say it any better. Where else do you expect us to look than where they are? I mean, that is just a no-brainer.
Crazy. I once said, you get up in the morning and you're going to get dressed for work. You have to put on a suit and a tie. Where are you going to look for your suit and a tie? You're not going to go to the refrigerator and look for, a clean shirt. I mean, it's basic. Like it's so simple that when you hear groups like CAIR speaking against that and saying it's some sort of ominous, no, we want to spy on the community. Believe me, no law enforcement agency, major law enforcement agency, whether it's New York, Los Angeles, Houston, Chicago, they want to build a bridge with the community. They don't want to spy on the community. CAIR is just doing that to put a wedge between law enforcement and Muslims in the United States. And when you look at their background of supporting terrorist organizations, particularly and the way they did that support of terrorist organization Hamas was through a very legitimate religious practice, which we would call charitable donations, charities. In Islam, it's called zakat, because one of the 5 tenets is, again, to give to charitable needs. So what does a group like CAIR do? But they use a phony front of a charitable organization, the Holy Land Foundation, which makes it seem like you're giving to an honorable cause. Don't we want to help hungry children, and don't we want to help war-torn survivors to get back on their feet? Yes, but they were taking that money under an individual who's giving it for an honorable reason, and then handing it over to a murderous organization that kills, destroys Jewish people, as well as Western Americans have been killed in Israel just for being there. And then the Palestinian Authority would then take money and support the murderer's family for the rest of their lives. I mean, these type of things are not the type of actions that tell me that CAIR is interested in building relations between Muslims and any authority, be it military or law enforcement.
One of the things that really got me that I really liked about your article is you talk about how George Washington University's program on extremism found prison radicalization will be a major factor in how the threat of terrorism will unfold over the next decade. I gave us a cursory look at some of the stats that were written on this, and I'm looking at this, I'm like, wow. I mean, there's a large number of Islamic terrorists who are soon going to be released into the general population here in the United States after having served their time for terror-related offenses. I mean, we're talking a lot of them are getting out within 2 years. It's
absolutely, yeah.
Apparent
and some
that
are one of those that is the individuals that is getting out, and he'll be out in probably 6 months. John Walker Lynn. Also
oh my God!
the American Taliban.
6 months?
He was actually, absolutely. His release date is May of 2019. He will walk out. He will walk out the door. He was apprehended by U.S. forces in coalition forces in Afghanistan, believed to be fighting with both the Taliban and Al Qaeda. He has been in prison. He has sued the Bureau of Prisons. He has continued to move in his radical Islamic form, and now he will get out of prison. Him as well as many others who have been. Not everyone serves a life prison sentence. So a lot of these individuals will get out, and there's been no. Two things have not happened, which should have happened. There has been no de-radicalization program in the Bureau of Prisons that would specifically deal with individuals who had committed terrorist acts. And two, there is no specialized release program for individuals convicted of terrorist-related crimes getting out of prison. When we think of sex offenders, we have a sex offender registry list. If a person commits a crime, a heinous crime like child abuse, sexual assault, they get put on a registration list so that local law enforcement knows when they're getting out of prison, where they're living, where they're working. All that information goes right to the local authorities. But there's nothing.
And that's for the rest of their life, too.
That's correct. And there is legal procedures where they can appeal and have their name removed, but there's nothing for terrorists. So a terrorist, a guy like John Walker Lynn, gets out of prison. What do we do? What specialized conditions are there? And the only thing that's come about in the last probably 6 or 8 months that really looks like we might get a handle on this is it's called the Tracer Act. It was passed in the House of Representatives. It was endorsed by Representative McCall from the Homeland Security Committee. It does two things. One, it monitors radicalization in prison and forwards the information to law enforcement agencies of individuals they believe have been radicalized in prison. And the other thing it does is it creates a national registry for convicted terrorists who get out of prison. And we're not talking about a watch list that maybe somebody's name just happened to inadvertently get on there and we have to correct it. This would be a list of individuals who have already gone through the legal system, have been convicted, have been sentenced, and now they're being released. And that information would be funneled to state, local, and federal law enforcement so that you know who's in your community. I mean, we're talking about communities now, building a wall of resistance. Wouldn't you want to know whether or not you had a jihadist, living in your neighborhood.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is the Tracer Act, and
me
again, it's passed in the House of Representatives. It's sitting in the Senate now as part of the Department of Homeland Security comprehensive bill. I would just hope that individuals who listen to the program might contact their local senators and ask them to call for a vote on this particular bill.
So you hear that, people. This is your big thing to do this week. Call your local senator. Ask them to push for the Tracer Act to be passed. You want it. You want the vote called. You want this done. This will make us safer. I don't know why we let them out within 20 years, because that's the extent of what they can give. But I see this as so sad.
It's kind of interesting going back to that GWU study on radicalization. They did two of them, and both of them found that there was a need for community and religious leaders to get involved in it. They were again talking at radicalization in prison, how they were the most vulnerable group. One of the individuals on the GWU counterterrorism program, I believe, is an individual by the name of Ishmael Roya. His original name was Randall Roya.
Oh, wow.
He converted to Islam. He became he was involved in the Virginia Jihad case back in just after 9/11. I believe it was 2002. He went into prison. He comes out. He talks about radicalizing influences and what can be done of it. Again, that's something that
and that's a former Muslim Student Association president, if I remember correctly.
Right. So I mean, when you have individuals telling you that this particular thing goes on, radicalization, some of the groups that we see, it's not everyone that's in prison who converts to Islam becomes radicalized, but they are vulnerable to radical ideology. They're able to see internet videos. They're able to listen to convicted terrorists who are already in prison, whether it's an El Said, No Ser, or stuff like that. And so you want to do something about that. The Alameda County Sheriff's Office actually wanted to do something specific, and in comes CAIR saying, oh, my goodness, you can't take the money because it's tainted. Well, why is it tainted? Because it comes from the Trump administration. But the program was started back in the Obama administration. I mean, money is tainted. That's just divisive. It's not. Yeah. It's not building a bridge. It's divisive. It's building a wall, which is kind of interesting. That they would actually put up a thing, build a wall.
It achieves their goal. I think that's they didn't care how they did it, but they achieved their goal. They defunded a program they thought might catch someone or stop someone from attacking the United States. That was their goal.
And, at some point, there has to be someone. I think of Rudy Jasser in the Muslim community and others that have to speak out. It's not the government's part to correct a religious organization. We the government, go on laws. If there's a problem with a religious organization other than its ideology, that has to come from the Muslim community. The Muslim community, by and large, has to stand up and speak out against groups like CAIR, who fund terrorists, who build walls against law enforcement, and say, no, we want to work. We don't want Islamic terrorists. We don't want Islamic radicalization to take place in our community. Think about Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the Somalians all being drawn to Al-Shabaab. I mean, that's something you would think the Muslim community would want to stand up and say, no, we want to work with law enforcement on this. We don't want our young people becoming jihadists and going to Syria or going to Somalia.
And that brings us to the next question. CAIR claims it's a civil rights organization, but is CAIR acting only as a civil rights organization, or are they also acting against other Muslims?
Yeah, I would say the answer is B. they're working against other Muslims. If you disagree with CAIR, the first thing they're going to tell you is you're Islamophobic. If you're a Muslim and you speak against CAIR, they will shun you. They will do everything they can to defame you, saying you don't speak for us. It's kind of interesting how they do that. Again, with the military individual, the sergeant in the Air Force who actually gets a waiver instead of saluting that individual, right? He's a Muslim. Instead of saluting that individual, that sergeant, and thanking him for his service to this country, to the defense of this country, what do they accuse him of doing? They accuse him of bombing and murdering other Muslims. That's what CAIR does to Muslims who don't agree with it.
And that's exactly the picture we need to get out there. Their thought of a Muslim who would honor the country by serving it is that he is a traitor to that's the way they teach it. The CAIR is teaching that if you serve this country, you're a traitor to Islam, and that's their picture, and that's what they're saying. So why support an organization that is anti-American? Because that's what they're telling you. They are, while they come out and claim they're American, that is an anti-American statement.
Right.
You can get as disgusted as you want listening to these idiots. Oh my gosh. Let's see. I've got one more. But one of my last questions is: how is CAIR combating federal and local law enforcement today? And we've covered an awful lot of that. But
again, a lot of it goes with Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was going to say a lot of it goes to, like I said, the most recent ones that I wrote about in the investigative project were Alameda County Sheriff's Department, the City of Los Angeles, the case that I talked about in New York and New Jersey where CAIR files lawsuits. They do that all the time. They just, if they see a law enforcement agency wanting to reach out to the community to deal with this particular, and it's a very real threat. I mean, it happens in the United States. It happens in Europe. It's called radicalization. It's where an individual moves to a radical form of Islamic ideology that makes him want to die, killing other people as if God is pleased with that. And as soon as a group wants to do something against radicalization, it's a very real social problem, much the same as drug abuse, or it may probably even more so, where lives are ruined. If CAIR speaks out against radicalization whenever an agency wants to do something with it, it's just frustrating. It's frustrating for law enforcement who want to actually get to know their community, and they don't need groups like CAIR obstructing.
I have one question from the chat room.
Okay.
Cal asked, what do you think of the Global Migrant Compact? I believe that is from the UN. They're trying to get people to take...
I'm not familiar with that. All I know is that, the UN... I was just thinking about that, their comments. They had an individual by the name of Mark Lamont Hill who spoke at the UN a couple of days ago. Mark Lamont Hill is touted as one of the leading intellectuals in our country. He's also a CNN contributor. He goes before the UN and talks about the destruction of Israel. And so a lot of things that the UN comes out with in policies and everything like that really does not, I think as the president said in his recent address there, was we go by our laws. We go by our immigration laws. We're not going to have some international body tell us who can or cannot come into our country. That's the sovereignty of all nations. So I'm not familiar with that specific thing, but I would say anything that the UN had to say about immigration and would be somewhat tainted by
you're giving
history.
the answer. I think that is the exact one. That's the right one to give. Is that, and this is what some Europeans, for some godforsaken reason, they can't see it. Submitting to the UN's post here, their posit of how to change migration and everything, is giving up your country's sovereignty. And strangely enough, this past week or the week before is Angela Merkel basically told other countries to give up their sovereignty. And to me, that makes no sense. About
I think it's in the Declaration of Independence. I might be wrong, but it says that it talks about how the United States was ready to take, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary, and it went on to say about how we, the colonists, wanted to take our place among the nations, because that is a sovereign right. A nation has a sovereign right to protect itself. Now, when we talk of immigration, I'm a child of my grandparents came from were immigrants. I'm sure that the vast majority of Americans can find some sort of immigrant in their lineage. We're not against immigration. We're kind of against illegal immigration. We know the threats from a law enforcement point of view, people that try to sneak into the country. The actual individual that I wrote about in The Fertile Soil of Jihad, Abdel Nasser Zabin, who for 12 years radicalized other individuals, was an illegal immigrant. He came into the United States in the port of New York and was first apprehended, sent back to the Middle East, and came back to the United States and hid here for 15 years doing his work. So illegal immigrants are not necessarily good. We welcome immigrants, legal immigrants to the United States. They help us. They give us culture. They give us a lot of different things. We're not against immigration. We're against the illegals.
So I want to say thank you for everything you've been sharing. Can you tell people how to follow your work and more about how maybe they could support the work of the Investigative Project on Terrorism also?
Sure, yeah. If they would want to go to the website of the investigative project.org, they'll be able to read a lot of the articles that we've just talked about, a lot of the issues. The founder of that organization, Steve Emerson, has been at the forefront against terrorism for decades. He's been maligned by CAIR. But if you want to go there, go to the website, investigativeproject.org. You can look at not only the articles, but there's a lot of video, there's a lot of audio on things that CAIR has said. There's been undercover investigations, all of those things. If you want to look at me on my website, I have a website, patrickdunleavy.com. But I would ask your listeners to contact their state senators and ask them to take action on the Tracer Act, TRACER Act. And I thank you for having me, Paul. I really do. I appreciate what you do, and thanks for having me as a guest.
Well, thank you. I hope to be kind of sending you something from my point of view that I'm trying to attack in education, and I'm going to, as soon as it's finished, I'm going to send you one of the first copies.
I appreciate that.
Waiting for a rabbi to finish this one section, and it's going through a textbook that's now in public schools, in advanced placement schools. So you imagine your brightest kids in your classrooms getting a textbook that is anti-Semitic, anti-Christian, and pro-jihadi.
Yeah.
I was shocked reading the textbook. The Muslim Saeed Shabi tore them up worse than I could. Being still in education, I couldn't write the section, so I found someone I knew.
One last thing I just thought of I wanted to say about CAIR. CAIR says that it's against hate crimes. It talks about attacks on Muslims. But in reality, when you look at the Department of Justice statistics or any of the other statistics on hate crimes, the vast majority of hate crimes in the United States are against Jewish people, are anti-Semitic. the vast majority. And then when you have CAIR calling out for the destruction of Israel and speaking out against Jewish organizations, they're not really seeing where the hate crime, the leading hate crime is against the Jewish community. So.
I want to say thank you. It's been a joy to have you back. I'm gonna keep reading your work and keep sharing it. I just want to say thank you for your work. Please don't stop.
I appreciate it, and I appreciate all that you do, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Okay. God bless.